I've often heard the criticism that the Book of Mormon can't be true because there's no archaeological evidence for Reformed Egyptian, the language on the gold plates. However, A, there is a flawed assumption baked into that assertion, and B, we actually do have evidence for it, but spoiler, it is not this. This is the character's document, and I've done a whole other video on that story. First, what we have to understand is that looking for evidence of Reformed Egyptian in Israel at the time of Nephi is flawed because Nephi never calls it Reformed Egyptian. This term doesn't show up in the Book of Mormon until the very last prophet Moroni mentions it in Mormon 9 1,000 years later, because at that point, it was reformed. If you tried to read English from 1,000 years ago, you'd probably have a really hard time of it. Languages change over time, so whatever the language of the plates started as, it likely evolved within the Nephite's own writing system. So we have to ask, even if we stumbled across it in the archaeological record, would we even recognize it for what it was? It may not look much like the Egyptian we're familiar with after centuries of evolution, and to what extent would it have integrated language elements from the surrounding American cultures? We just don't know, and there's even hints that this may have been a specialized scribal language for the keeping of the plates and not the widespread lingua franca of the Nephite civilization. What the language of the plates started out as, Nephi calls the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians. Which brings us to the fact that we actually do have some limited evidence for a kind of reformed Egyptian. As it turns out, we have over 200 examples of Israelite scribes modifying or reforming Egyptian hieratic script for accounting documents at the time of Nephi. In other words, the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians. Scholars have called this modified Egyptian, Palestinian hieratic, or a Judahite variety of Egyptian. Some of these texts are completely written in Egyptian hieratic, while others mix hieratic with Hebrew. As of right now, most of our examples of this Jewish Egyptian are of numbers, measurements, and accounting documents. But there are some subtle details in the text that indicate that these Israelite scribes had a greater understanding of the Egyptian language that possibly could have produced larger literary works. In addition, Israelite historical and religious texts found in Egypt were written in Aramaic, so an Israelite language, using Egyptian Demotic script. Only time will tell what we'll end up discovering as history catches up with the Book of Mormon. You can learn more at evidence number 33 at Scripture Central.